Oh, man. I'm totally back, folks. It's another episode of Paleocrat Diaries. We're back in studio here at Paleocrat Diaries headquarters in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a Team Tiny Dancer production, and I'm your host, Jeremiah Bannister. I'll tell you, I'm glad to be back on this microphone for another episode of this. Originally, it was just going to be kind of a special edition, the podcast. That's all it was going to be. And I said, well, I'll do it today, right? And then I'll go back to making videos. But I had too much fun. I did. I had too much fun. And just the idea of breaking out the camera and breaking out the lights and putting on the makeup, the whole 9 yards. I go all out for this, right? It's a lot of work, but doing it like this, being able to just sit down, to be next to my dog, Coco, my St. Bernard. She's beautiful, totally awesome. To have her by my feet, to have my lava lamp going, my pink light over in the corner. All that's missing is a little fire. Maybe some licorice and a stein of wassail. But I really shouldn't complain, you know? Not too much anyway. I live a pretty dope life. And I've got this cool gig going on. And you know what? Speaking of cool gigs, last night I had something really awesome happen. My wife and I got to dress up all nice and fancy for the Michigan Right to Life event at the illustrious DeVos Ballroom. Even got to exchange some words with Bishop Wojkowiak. I told him about the promotional video I made last year, wherein I described my daughter's life and death with childhood cancer and how that led our family back to the faith. He told me to go ahead and send that to the diocese and encouraged me, in fact. He gave me some really encouraging words, and I was really grateful for even the few moments that I got to spend with him. And I'm especially grateful that he wasn't upset that I interrupted him. I knelt right down next to him during dinner, and he was at a table with some really important people, and so I'm really glad that he wasn't at all offended by the intrusion. I also got to see combat veteran and businessman John James. He's currently running for the Senate. This isn't the first time I'd seen him, though. I saw him at the Orbit Room when he opened for Mike Pence. But it's always a pleasure to see him. He's a great guy, very charismatic, and of course, we wish him the best. And the keynote speaker of the night was Trey Gowdy. I gotta tell you, the guy is hilarious. I don't know if he's writing his own jokes, but he could definitely go on the circuit with some stand-up. He's really funny. The whole place was cracking up. But then after he was done breaking the ice and telling all the jokes, he got real serious. I mean, it was a really heavy, personal story that he was telling, a series of stories, in fact, that were quite obviously transformative in his life. Events, situations, people that impacted him greatly and made him the man that he is today. And he talked very openly about his disdain, in fact, and his disgust for the political culture of Washington, D.C. There were a few times that I thought he was going to cry. He had to be holding back tears. I mean, you could see it in his chin. His chin was quivering, and it was so powerful, and you could just hear the pin drop in the room. I mean, it was totally silent. People were captivated by what he was saying. It was a really powerful event. And then after it was over, we paid the babysitter, and I got a phone call from my friend over at Meaning of Catholic. His name is Timothy Flanders. If you have not followed him, you need to do so. He's extremely good at what he's doing. His blog is fantastic, meaningofcatholic.com. He used to be Eastern Orthodox before converting to Catholicism, and so he talks a lot about that issue, about the East and the West, about the division, the schism, and what he believes should be done and how it can be remedied. He also talks about liturgical abuses and reform, the need for conservatives and traditional Catholics to unite. He even has a really great blog about how to deal with social media addiction. I've been meaning to incorporate it into a podcast at some point, and I plan to do that. But his material is always top-notch, which is why I'm especially excited that he went out and created a YouTube channel. And his first video, the guy makes this video, and it goes totally gangbusters. It's being shared left and right. Totally awesome. It covers the Amazon Synod. In fact, it covers the lead-up and kind of this crazy ritual that kind of looked like a pagan ritual, to be quite honest, that Pope Francis was involved with. And he talks about that. He talks about the sin of scandal and what that means. It's timely, it's relevant, and it's thoroughly charitable. He does a really good job, and I'm really proud to say that he's a friend of mine and that we're fellow parishioners over at Sacred Heart. So go check out meaningofcatholic.com. Make sure to find him on Twitter, and of course, subscribe to his brand new YouTube channel and let him know that we've sent you, right? Tell him we love what he's doing Make sure to show your support. Plus, there may in fact be an interview with the two of us where we're both in a video together, going back and forth. It's going to be a bunch of fun, and I'll let you know if that's going to happen, but keep that in your thoughts and prayers. So when that was over, when that phone call was done, I was getting ready to go to bed, and all of a sudden I got another phone call. Right? My phone was just off the charts. And this time, though, it was from a friend of mine. In fact, friends, a husband and a wife. And they live in the Detroit area. And I've been friends with them for a very long time. They were with us through all the ups and downs and all arounds with our daughter's life and death with cancer. But we've been friends well before that. In fact, he, the husband, is my longest lasting friend. We've been friends since high school at Family Altar Christian School. And they just wanted to take the time to thank me for talking in the last podcast about the future of masculinity. They have a son, and they're worried about what the world is going to be like and what life is going to be like for him in the future. And so to hear somebody talking about masculinity, about headship, about compatibilism, these things were really important to them, and they were really glad that it was a podcast because both of them work, right? They're kind of the Sally Sue and Johnny Q. Publics of America. They wake up early, they work hard, they get home, they work with the kids, homeschooling and stuff like that, and they don't have a lot of time to sit around and watch something. And as much as they enjoy the videos that I make, and as easy as it is to just listen to the videos that I make, that's why I script them the way that I do, it's still that it's a video. It's still that I'm on the camera and that there are videos embedded inside of it, and there are screenshots, there's text. It's all choreographed properly to flow. It's made for the visual medium. And so to have a podcast where they're relieved of that, they're relieved of the idea that they have to sit down and look at something, and instead they can just go old school and turn on the radio, gather the family around, and just enjoy a really good episode. And I told them, I said it works out perfectly fine too, because in fact that's what I'm going to be doing a lot more of. It's a lot easier, not as time consuming. I'll still do videos, of course. Most of them will be things to do with events that I report on journalistically, where I actually have to take my camera, going to do some interviews, stuff like that. But when it comes to just talking and going through books and poetry and things of that nature, then I'm probably just going to stick with this medium like this. So it was really nice to hear that from them and to receive that kind of affirmation, not only about the topic that I talked about on the last show, and if you haven't heard it, make sure to go check it out at my YouTube channel, but also the fact that I've chosen to do it as a podcast. So I was going through all my notes, thinking of what I wanted to talk about today. I've got a whole list of topics. I've laid them out chapter by chapter in a whole bunch of books. And I want to diversify it. I want to talk about different kinds of issues. I don't want to get stuck on one book. I don't want to get stuck on one theme. And I'm going to stick with the idea of saying I don't want to talk about current events. Other people can handle that. You know, there's people that's all they do, and that's fine. I follow it. I have websites that I go to, but I don't want to be that guy. And so I said, I want to talk about something that again, is more timeless, something that is topical, that transcends the ebb and flow of current events. And so I decided today that I was going to talk about a book called Diversity, The Invention of a Concept. It's by Peter Wood, and it was inspired by an event that took place last month. It was actually on September 11th. It was a situation that took place, and I got myself involved in this scuffle. It happens every once in a while. It's not the first time that I've got myself in trouble over this exact topic, but something finally just snapped in me, and I said, you know what, I'm pretty sick and tired of dealing with a certain argument. And that argument has to do with race. More specifically, with arguments pertaining to tolerance, diversity, and multiculturalism, and as it inevitably turns out every single time, whether it matters if you have friends from other races, whether you live in an area with people of other races, and whether you being part of an interracial marriage that's created interracial children says anything whatsoever about your views regarding race. Seems obvious to me. What happened is this, a little bit of a backdrop, okay? I'll tell you how it broke down. On September 11th, my cousin, Dr. Derek, the brainchild behind the hilarious mockumentary series over at Paleocrat. He posted this tweet, and it actually was kind of a collage of tweets put together. People of Middle Eastern descent living in the United States talking about the hashtag always remember or never forget, something like that. The idea that we would always keep at the forefront of our minds what happened on that fateful day. But it wasn't the same for every single person, and there were different experiences, not all of them very pleasant. And they were telling stories about, well, I'll always remember that on September 11th, people were looking at me messed up because of my hijab. Or that people the week later were really mean to my grandmother at the store. Some of them complained about the way that people reacted when they discovered that one of their relatives, maybe their younger brother or their father, was named Osama. Sad and unfortunate stories, each and every one of them. But the profiles, not all of them had pictures, right? Some of them were cartoons or whatever, and they weren't real names. And so it was kind of difficult to weed out which ones were true, which ones were false. Is this a proper description? Is it a perception that they may have had? Is it first-hand or second-hand knowledge? These are all really important things to consider, especially in a day and age where we're inundated with hate hoaxes. These things happen all the time. In fact, we just had one recently. There was a girl at a private school that said that a group of white boys held her down and cut off 3 of her dreadlocks. It was totally fake. Never happened. In fact, I encourage people, go and read the apology letter and judge for yourself and see what kind of harm that this inflicts on people, innocent people. We had a situation like this happen in Grand Rapids. In fact, I referenced it in the public comment section at one of the commission meetings. What was it, 2018? According to the news, the local NAACP says a man who allegedly urinated on a young black girl and used a racial slur should face sex assault and hate crime charges. The 60-year-old suspect is held in the Kent County Jail. Quote, "This is clearly a case of child molestation as well as a hate crime and should be treated as such," said the president of the Greater Grand Rapids National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Those are serious claims. Child molestation, hate crime. This isn't something to play around with. Come to find out, there was an update, inconvenient, but it said Grand Rapids police and prosecutors late Friday said they determined that the story was not valid and said no charges would be issued against a 60-year-old man arrested following the initial report. Police said several children, all of them 7 years old or younger, were playing together sometime before 6 p.m. when one of the children urinated on the 5-year-old girl. It took trained specialists with the Children's Advocacy Center to try to get the truth out of them. They weren't able to do it, but the parents did. And they later said that the kids concocted the story to avoid trouble. It's a serious problem. In fact, it's so serious that Professor Wilfred Riley wrote a book called Hate Crime Hoax, How the Left is Selling a Fake Race War. So it's not as if this stuff's just being pulled out of thin air. This stuff's real. It's impacting people's lives. And so when individuals go on Twitter and they have these handles, that aren't even real names, and they're not using profile pictures with their actual face on it, it's good to be a little bit skeptical. Hoaxes are real. So are trolls, by the way. And I can speak to this with firsthand knowledge because I operated a troll account. Thotapopinski. It's Sotapopinski with a lisp. You can go and check it out. But the thing is, I've done that. I know how it works. So you can't just believe whatever somebody says online. You have to have at least some amount of skepticism. And again, is it an actual event? Is it the perception of an event? Is it first-hand, second-hand, third-hand knowledge? These are all serious questions to consider whenever we're factoring in claims online made by people that we can't verify about stories that may or may not be true. And none of that's to deny that this stuff actually does happen. But just like Wilfred Riley says, when you have hoaxes and you have this kind of online culture where people can say whatever they want without any verification, everybody just runs with it because it sounds so terrible and they don't want to come across as possibly denying the validity of someone or something. That when that happens, it undermines the legitimate cases that are actually there. And that's a serious problem. And if we're serious about dealing with the problem, then we need to begin taking these things seriously. But to do this is going to require serious and mature conversation about topics like stereotyping, profiling, actual diversity. What does this mean? In-group and out-group bias. These are all difficult and even tender topics at this point. Because nobody in the United States, very few people, want to be a racist. Very few people want to even think that it's possible that they're racist because they're genuinely trying to make strides. I think we've come a long way since Jim Crow. There's a lot left to be done, I'm sure. But the idea that we're still back in the 1930s, we're back in the 1700s, in the colonial era, it's just absurd. And you can see how this plays out in the way that people will defend themselves from charges that they're racist, that they're prejudiced, that they're wrongfully stereotyping people. And this brings me to the book Diversity, The Invention of a Concept by Peter Wood. Little background on Peter Wood. Dr. Wood is the president of the National Association of Scholars. He's an anthropologist and former provost. He was appointed president of the NAS in January of 2009. Before that, he served as NAS's executive director and as provost of the King's College in New York City. Dr. Wood was a tenured member of the anthropology department at Boston University, where he also held a variety of administrative positions, including associate provost and president's chief of staff. He also oversaw the university's scholarly publications and served as acting university librarian. In addition to his scholarly work, Dr. Wood has published several hundred articles in print and online journals such as Partisan Review, National Review Online, and Chronicle of Higher Education. I've had this book for a long time, and I've always considered it to be very important because it touches on things that are at the core of everyday experience in modern American life. But he does well by talking right from the get-go about diversity and what it is and what it's not. Going so far as to point out that within modern understandings of diversity, that there's a kind of factionalism, a racialism, even a kind of separatism. And we see this iconically in the way that diversity is often portrayed. It always reminds me of a notepad that my mom received many years ago. It had to be the mid-90s, kind of when diversity was becoming a real catchphrase. But she got this notepad, and at the very top, in big, huge letters, it said diversity. And the colored pages, I liked writing on it because the pages were all different colors. There was yellow and pink and blue and green and orange. It was really a cool little notepad. And at the very top, it said diversity. And right under those letters were individuals from different cultures. You had a Native American dressed in regalia, an Asian man wearing a conical hat. You had a black man wearing a kufi kofi hat. I think there was even a Mexican in a sombrero. And you see this every now and again. You see this kind of cultural expression. We went to a powwow not long ago. Our daughter who passed away, her best friend, one of her best friends, and she dresses in regalia. She's part of the Gun Lake tribe, the Potawatomis. I have another friend up the road. He wears a dashiki shirt every once in a while. But I didn't see any sombreros in Juarez or Mexicali. Maybe that's a border town problem. Maybe everybody kind of in the center of Mexico, maybe they're all wearing sombreros. But that's what the notepad had as the iconic symbols of what it considered to be diversity. There was a white guy in there, too. I don't remember exactly. I think that he was dressed up like a colonialist. I don't think that it was, no Dutch clogs or anything like that. I think it was just a colonialist. They had to figure out, what's the white guy going to dress as? Is he just in a business suit? Like, what's this all about? And I think there's something to the fact that they made him a colonialist. But the people that are involved in this, right, these diversologues, the people who trade in the ideology of diversity, or the diversidacs, the people who teach it, the diversicrats, the people who regulate and enforce it, as Peter Wood describes them. This to them is an iconic symbol that they can look to and say, that right there is diversity. And the diversicrats really do hope to create concrete blocks of people based on specific and exclusive identity claims and distinct cultural resentments. As Wood writes, concocted diversity imagines the world as divisible into neatly defined social groups, each with its own thriving cultural traditions. Again, the diversity icons there on the notepad. But as he rightly says, the problem is, everywhere anthropologists looked, they found people on the move, changing languages, borrowing customs, merging traditions, intermarrying, creating hybrid cultures, reinventing themselves, acting as custodians of ancient laws in the morning, and participating in the global market that afternoon. And you know, the truth is, he's right. A lot of what people call diversity really does exist only in their minds, and it doesn't really reflect itself in the everyday experience of ordinary people. And that's why there's such a tension between different ideas of what diversity happens to be. As he says, on the one hand, it's deeply rooted and ineradicable, and on the other, it's frail and endangered. And the thing is, this skewers a really important fact. And that's that when we do encounter people who are from different cultures, that it can be and often is unsettling. We see this in the extreme. If you go online, you can see a video. It's a pretty interesting video. I have kind of mixed feelings about it. But there's a white guy that goes deep into the jungle and he sees a tribe. And it's the first time that this tribe had ever seen a white man. They're very cautious as they approach him. They've got their spears out. The men are in the forefront, walking across this river to greet him. And he's got his hands out and open, palms up, showing that he has nothing to hide. But they come up and they're rubbing his arm, thinking maybe it's powder, maybe it's something that he's put on himself to make his skin look that way. They're very confused by it. That would be an extreme. A less extreme example of this unsettling, fundamentally unsettling feeling that we have, would come from the movie Rise. And if you haven't seen it, it's a fascinating documentary about the history of crumping and clowning, dance forms, and how there was a gang culture and how an individual, in fact a clown, had put together this dance troupe that brought people out of the bad place and gave them something to do where they found meaning, that they got to exert exhausting amounts of energy. But there's a young black girl talking in the movie, and she's describing how there are individuals who are shocked at how comfortable and at ease that she is in the hood. But she admits something that I think is rather profound, and it's that the hood is her home, and that she's way more comfortable there than she is when she goes to suburbs or rural areas or the shops downtown. It shows here that even in modern America, there's still a fundamental unsettling. There's still an unease. Part of this is based on experience. Part of it's rooted in stereotyping, in profiling, in fact. And it's not even entirely bad, because it's rarely entirely wrong. Even the crazy diversicrats admit this much, at least when it comes to doing things like dealing with contracts, or as Peter Wood describes, granting awards, government patronage for rooting out discrimination. Heck, we see this play itself out all the time when individuals talk about rich, white, Christian, heterosexual men. That's a profile. It's a stereotype, in fact. And it's the same with popular left-wing politicking about mass shooters. We saw this recently with the Joker. But again, there's a terrible truth. And it's no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we may wish to the contrary, division itself cannot be eradicated. And yet there's a great deal of hesitation and reluctance for anyone to be engaged in anything that even remotely resembles judging a culture other than their own. And the reason why is because nobody wants to be accused of being prejudiced. Nobody wants to be accused of having ill will, and that's a good thing. This is especially true when we're talking about so-called marginalized groups, and especially if it's coming from a rich, white, heterosexual Christian male. I mean, actually, we could rephrase that, because if the fallout from the Women's March teaches us anything, it's that you don't have to be rich, you don't have to be heterosexual, you don't have to be Christian, and you don't even technically have to be male. White is enough. Paradoxically, eradicating judgments and valuations is exactly what the diversicrats desire. Consider this. Peter Wood talks about a situation in 2002. A woman by the name of Deborah Burke. She was an anthropologist and diversity website coordinator at Oregon State University. She conducted interviews for OSU's Pride celebration. From silence to celebration. It's a rainbow world after all. John Sykes, a gay student, said, quote, "It's not just tolerating people with differences, it's embracing them and supporting them. It is one thing to be tolerated, and that is totally not the same thing as being embraced and celebrated." John's right. It's not the same. It's not the same to say I tolerate somebody who's different and I celebrate our differences. Whatever that even means, I celebrate our differences. Think about that for a second. I celebrate that we don't agree. Let's throw a party for that. That's seriously clown world stuff. But as the book says, this kind of artificial diversity dehumanizes. It turns each of us into mere exponents of social groups. That's what's happening. It denies our individuality. Yes. And it makes us complicit in denying the full humanity of others. To treat people as objects, as though they are the residuum of their race, class, gender, and other such superficialities, and not as individuals who define themselves through their ideas and creative acts. And that is an injustice. We see this all the time. Look, there is a balance between groups and individuals. I grant that. I'm somebody who's appreciated the works of E.O. Wilson, for example. Group selection. I've often talked about The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, A Valiant Defense of Group Selection. Even kin selection has this. You're still dealing with the group. It's not just this pure individualism, which Haidt rightly describes as being kind of weird, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And that not every culture around the world believes individualism the way that we do. But we'd be wrong to think that the way that we understand diversity now is the only way diversity has ever been understood, or even worse, that it's only now that we're finally thinking about concepts of diversity. Quote, "Anthropologists and others in the 19th century still took it as a matter of course that the various tribes and nations of the world could be arranged on a single scale of progress, from the most primitive to the most advanced." Let me say this, we still do that. Okay? It's inherent, in fact, to technocratic philosophies of progress and liberal utopias of a new world order, but I digress. Some of the great formative debates in anthropology were over the proper calibration of this scale. Which contemporary peoples most resemble the hypothetical state of primitive man? Again, people in the West do this all the time. In what order and by what steps should man's advancement up the scale of civilization be measured? And who, the English, the French, Americans, should represent the furthermost march of civilization? Again, we see this all the time with the technocratic philosophies of progress and the liberal utopia of a new world order. But these people, he mentions American lawyer Lewis Henry Morgan. He talks about the English Quaker turned Oxford anthropologist Edward Burnett Taylor and the Scottish folklorist Sir James George Fraser as being ambitious. And even though a lot of modern people would look at them and say, well, their books and their views and their methods, they're no good. These individuals were the ones that gave us the first genuinely complex and detailed account of human cultural diversity. Enter Charles A. Goodrich in The Universal Traveler. And I thought this was really interesting. I knew nothing about this, right? The Universal Traveler, according to its own claim, was designed to introduce readers at home to an acquaintance with the arts, customs, and manners of the principal modern nations of the globe, embracing a view of their persons, character, employments, amusements, religion, dress, habitations, modes of warfare, food, arts, agriculture, manufactures, superstitions, government, literature, etc. This is old school stuff. This is pre-20th century. And they were wildly popular. And they wrote in ways that modern travel writers are not allowed to write. Okay? They talked about their dislike of persons or the adornments of the people they encountered. As Wood describes, there are many Americans who shy away from any frank expression of their aesthetic reactions to people who look different from themselves, lest they be accused of racism, especially when accounts of physical appearances contain a shade of moral assessment. Because nobody wants to be accused of being a racist. But as Wood points out, these books and these anthropologists, they answer a genuine curiosity about what the world away from home looks like. And they sustain the idea that learning about the diversity of mankind enlarges and enriches the mind. This is nothing new. He talks about how this even played itself out in children's books. You have James Greenwood's Savage Habits and Customs, Jane Andrews' Seven Little Sisters Who Live on the Round Ball That Floats in the Air, Milton Hadley's Little Men and Women, and Kids of Many Colors by Grace Duffy Boyan and Ike Morgan. And there's a selection out of there that I really wanted to read. And it says this, a nice little poem. All our little boys and girls wonder how it would be if they lived in other lands across some distant sea. And over there in every land the children say, oh dear, how do the children look and play around the world from here? And they conclude by saying this. The kids of many colors, hair straight and kinked and curled, are just the little people that make the little world. Now, that little world has gotten even smaller as the consequences of technology are living in a technocratic global village. We've become, as Wood describes, increasingly sensitive to the people in these no longer quite so far away places. We're more reluctant to generalize about their cultures, and we're strongly averse to responding openly to their physical appearance. It's totally true. It's totally true. It's easy. In other words, it's easy to generalize when people are far away. It's easy to generalize when you keep something at bay. But here's another truth. When Americans in the 19th century thought about diversity, they were, at least part of the time, thinking about sex. Wood says, sometimes these themes were hidden, but not always. And Americans are now slowly coming to admit that their countrymen always experienced sexual attraction across the color line. He mentions the story of Pocahontas wrapping her arms around the head of Captain John Smith, which is charged with the erotic idea that a European male, reduced to a position of powerlessness and imminent death, might still excite the interest of a woman from an uncivilized tribe. Americans of both sexes have long fantasized and sometimes acted across such cultural boundaries. He talks about a 5-volume book called The Secret Museum of Mankind. I've never seen this book. I'd be interested to see it. But it's America's favorite ethnopornographer, Dr. Jacobus X, sometimes identified as Jacobus Souter. He says it was filled with myriad posed formal photographs of men and women in ethnic costume engaged in such activities as playing musical instruments, practicing archery, and paddling canoes. It sounds innocent enough, but it was risque, showing bare breasts and undraped limbs, often with captions like, a dangerous beauty in sullen mood. And it's fair for him to admit that at times, in some cases, the boundary was merely irrelevant to an attraction between two individuals, but that very often there were attractions that were fraught with pent-up feelings about hierarchy and subordination. It's totally true in history, and it may be true today, to a lesser degree. But I get this all the time. Whenever I'm in a conversation with a diversicrat that's talking about how it doesn't matter if you've got black friends, it doesn't matter if your mother-in-law is from Korea. It doesn't matter that your wife is half Korean. Underneath that argument, lurking behind it in the shadows, is this accusation, this insinuation that your attraction, and in this case, my attraction to my wife, is fraught with pent-up feelings about hierarchy and subordination. Wood goes and says, but as Americans today come to admit that earlier generations of our countrymen frequently made it across racial and cultural boundaries, we're in some danger of turning this complex fact into another myth, that the attraction was really about domination, and that it's to be understood primarily in terms of powerful but hypocritical white men exploiting vulnerable black, Indian, and other non-white women. One such stereotype depicts insecure white men who, in an era of emancipated white women, see submissive Oriental women that they think they can dominate. Yes, That is a dangerous myth. That is a dangerous myth. And it's a myth that people are only willing to say to me on the internet. I've never had somebody say that to my face because them are fighting words. That's the kind of stuff you put your dukes up about. But it happens all the time. Diversicrats fall back on this. And it's convenient, especially for the people who've approached me about this, because time and time again, predictably so, they're lily white. They're lily white people living in lily white towns with lily white families. So it's a convenient little cop-out when they tell you it doesn't matter that you have black and Native American friends. When they tell you that it doesn't matter that you live in a multiracial neighborhood, or that it doesn't matter that you're in an interracial marriage making interracial children. It's convenient for someone who doesn't have friends who are part of the Nation of Islam who come over to your house, who think you're a fantastic individual, who consider you a true friend, and who never, not even one time, have accused of being a racist. Never. Or a Korean mother-in-law that has never, not one time, said, I think the real reason that you're married to my daughter is that you are a fragile white man living in an era where women are free and you want to dominate a woman. Never. Because that kind of charge is something that really can only be said by people who are relatively insecure, that desire to say the right words but not necessarily have the burden of living the right life. There's a lengthy quote by Wood, and I'm going to read the whole thing. It's good because it hits right to the nail on this. The new diversity may be, as we tend to think it is, an ethical advance, but it's worth taking note of what this possible advance has cost us. In a crucial sense, we've banished our ability to engage freely and creatively with cultural diversity. We live instead with a myth that all diversity is good, and that to respond appropriately to cultural differences, we must shut off that portion of our brain that automatically assesses. If diversity really does enlarge and enrich us, surely it's because diversity puts a strenuous demand on our judgment. When we encounter real diversity, we need to make intellectual, moral, and aesthetic sense of it. And the further it lies from our previous experience, and I would even say our current experience, the more our intellectual, moral, and aesthetic judgment will be challenged. But in the current epoch of all diversity is good diversity, we're faced with a new prime directive: do not judge. You got to say the right words. Doesn't matter if your life doesn't reflect it. I'm saying the right words. The new spirit of diversity finds its ethical mandate in a form of supposed open-mindedness that is inimical to the impulse to judge other cultures. According to this view, to judge is to be ethnocentric, and to be unworried about being ethnocentric is to license bigotry. This criticism is overdrawn and unwarranted. It's overdrawn in that making judgments about other cultures is not evidence of a closed and ethnocentric mind. Some forms of judging may indeed fall into that deserved condemnation. But the act of judging cultural differences need not be a sterile exercise in applying fixed categories. We learn by judging and by correcting our judgments when they prove faulty. And we don't know until we attempt to frame the generalization and assess how well it comports with the facts. A generalization that we stick to despite the facts is an unwarranted stereotype, and there's always the risk that we will make our generalizations come true by acting as if they already are. But this is the clincher right here. In any case, the contemporary attempt to prescribe judging is doomed to failure. For we will judge anyway, even if we feel ashamed of it or blocked from expressing our judgments. Judging cultural difference is simply how humans naturally encounter the world. We should aim not to forestall judgment, but to make it explicit and therefore within reach of further consideration and correction. And that's where you live it. That's where you live it. You make it within reach. You know, growing up in a place that was lily white, and it was easy to have certain misunderstandings. Having lived in rural parts of the Midwest, I often heard people make generalizations about black people and how they would take their time walking across the street. That's not entirely false. I mean, there are a lot of black people that walk across the street, and many of them do walk slowly. But now that I've lived in a city, I can tell you, city dwellers walk across the street. And a lot of city dwellers walk slowly as they walk across the street. It's just part of city life. And per the numbers, a majority of black people happen to live in the city. So it's a stereotype that unless you had some proximity to it, you wouldn't fully understand or appreciate why certain people have the perceptions that they have. Right or wrong. Proximity and experience place our judgments within reach so that we can further consider them and that we can correct them. But our understanding of diversity, uprooted from genuine human reactions and sterilized, is comparatively shallow. As Wood says, we no longer have access to unalloyed feelings of amazement, repugnance, pity, and horror that some cultural differences might indeed warrant. We no longer allow our senses to take in the uncanny, the horribly ugly, or the provocative in the appearance of foreign bodies or strange dress. The more cautious and limited reactions we allow ourselves may reward us with a sense of achieved virtue, but they also wall us off from reality. It's totally true. Once upon a time, Americans encountered the world's diversity with awe, anger, prejudice, disgust, erotic excitement, pity, delight, and curiosity. Then we recast ourselves as champions of tolerant diversity, and we became fearful of inconvenient facts and lost interest. And not only do we lose interest, but we've placed safeguards around ourselves to prevent us from being interested in the first place, saying even to consider these things, even to wonder these things, to make any kinds of judgments whatsoever on these things, that is a sign of something very nefarious deep within my heart. Don't get close. It's walled off. We need to overcome this. I want to end with something rather personal, in fact. You know, when talking about this topic, it's obviously something that hits home for me because it literally has to do with my home, where I live, in a multiracial neighborhood, in a multiracial city, the kind of religion that I'm part of. In fact, the vast majority of people who identify with Catholicism are people who are non-white. My marriage, my children. So when people make the claim, the accusation and the insinuation that just because you're in an interracial marriage doesn't necessarily mean that you're not racist, I can grant that. I can imagine that there are people out there, real scumbags, who look at their wives, their non-white wives, and deep in their heart, all they really want is to dominate. Those are some sick people. But when I look at myself and I say, why am I with my wife? When I saw my wife at the ball joint bar back in 2002 when I was on leave from the Navy, and I saw my wife all the way across the bar and she was playing pool with her best friend, was I sitting there and thinking, boy, she looks like some ripe picking for a submissive wife? On her knees, groveling for the master of the home? What was it? And what was it that caused me not just to be with her, but to stay with her, to choose her over others, and to stick with her all these years later? After we lost our child, we lost our firstborn. What was it? Was it a sickening desire for domination? We're coming up on our 17th year of marriage this November. We will have been together for 17 years, and we've been through crazy stuff. And when I was trying to think, what is it that's held this together? What is it that is at the core of my desire to be with her, to remain with her, to grow old with her? And it brought me back to a poem by Carl Sandburg called Happiness. Carl Sandburg says, I asked professors who teach the meaning of life to tell me what is happiness. And I went to famous executives who boss the work of thousands of men. They all shook their heads and gave me a smile, as though I was trying to fool with them. And then one Sunday afternoon, I wandered out along the Des Plaines River, and I saw a crowd of Hungarians under the trees with their women and children and a keg of beer and an accordion. Was there an element of the exotic? Probably. There's not too many hot Asian ladies playing 8-ball in Battle Creek. It's probably a little bit of the same for her, not many men walking around in their navy blues? Was it the fact that on the third day that we were together that she woke me up early in the morning asking if I was hungry only to show me that she had bought me a chicken Whopper from Burger King? Well, that probably played a role, not going to lie. That's probably part of it. In fact, I've talked about that in another speech that I delivered. But at the end of the day, all of those things are part of it. The fact that she's half Asian, that's part of who she is. The fact that her mother's Korean, that's part of who she is. The fact that she bought me a chicken Whopper, that's part of who she is. But she's more than that. And who she is who I love. And the same holds true for my neighbors, the people who live in this community. I love and care for them because of who they are. Their race, their culture, that's part of it. There's a value, a very important value of proximity at play in all of this, of being part of a community that's not just your own, but that you become part of it to where you can call it your own. It's not tokenism. It's brotherly love. It's mutual respect and understanding. It's being a good neighbor and a good friend. And to play on Sandberg's description of the Hungarians, it's being a crowd of friends and neighbors, white, black, Asian, and Hispanic, at a block party with our wives and children, enjoying a table filled with barbecued rib tips, bowls of fried rice, and chunks of cheddar cheese. Love this video? What a coincidence! I do too! Now head on over to PaleocratDiaries.com for more videos, blogs, parodies, and reviews, even Team Tiny Dancer stuff. And don't forget to check out our new members and services pages. It's how I pay for my kids to attend Catholic school. Until next time, Memento Mori.